What is up? It is Saturday, December 21st, 2024. Got a topic from Reddit. I will explain it and then catch you up on the morning. The topic is about getting this windshield cleared. No, it's about the original poster was saying they've been in situations where they're in a meeting, so some type of semi-public setting, right? It's not a one-on-one, and someone basically calls them out to correct them, and they're just blatantly incorrect. And it's kind of like it's almost like the feeling is that someone's trying to make them look like an idiot. Sometimes, maybe that's not always the intention, but that's sort of how they seem to feel, like they're being called out for something that's just incorrect. And so they're saying this has happened. It's not like one person doing this. It's kind of a theme that they've noticed. Something else they mentioned was like, I wonder if it's like a language barrier, cultural thing they happen to notice. And I'm not gonna even get into the ethnicity, but they were saying seems like historically there seems to be like more people from a particular ethnicity doing this. So they were like, I wonder, is it like a cultural thing? By the way, I didn't interpret that in their wording like they were being racist, more like a genuinely, is there some sort of cultural difference that I'm not aware of where this is more common? So I thought it was a really interesting topic. I've had this kind of experience in the past. We'll get into that. I've had a pretty rough yesterday and today. I've recorded 3 videos that I'm not putting online. The first one, I forgot to turn on the receiver for the audio, which is pretty embarrassing. Second one, I actually posted this morning, and someone pointed out that all of the audio is ruined. So I took that down. And then the third video I did on the way to CrossFit today, which, by the way, I started driving to the wrong gym because it's a different gym on Saturdays, and I'm stupid. And I could tell I was very frustrated. And so I recorded the full 20-minute video, and like right before pulling into the gym, I just turned it off. Like, I'm not happy with it. So I'm going to repeat it now. And I feel better about going into it. So again, topic is about people in like a semi-public setting, basically correcting you or attempting to correct you and providing incorrect information. So friendly reminder, if you want your questions answered, comment below with the question. If it's more detailed or you want to be anonymous, look for Dev Leader on social media. Send me with all the details you want. I'm happy to read through. And a reminder that Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific on my main channel, Dev Leader, I do have a live stream every Monday. Tune into that. It's basically like this, except there's a chat, and I will basically dedicate as much time to the chat answering your questions as possible. So, what does this look like? Well, if you haven't been in a situation like this, let's kind of walk through like hypothetically what this looks and feels like, right? Because I want you to put yourself in this person's position to understand like why it's frustrating. So, and they provided an interesting sort of like example of like being a mechanic and having expertise in an area, like taking something apart, rebuilding it, and then having someone, sorry, my lung capacity is 0 after doing CrossFit and getting out of my cold. But they were saying, you have expertise taking apart something and putting it back together as a mechanic, and then someone comes around and they tell you like something else about it, and you're like, I literally, have disassembled and reassembled this thing many times. I know what I'm talking about. So in situations like this, I think a couple things happen. One is that like there's incorrect information being presented, and especially as software engineers, like it's not, I think in general, people aren't really comfortable with incorrect information. But I think especially as, people in software development, as engineers, we're doing analysis like 100% of the time. So when there's incorrect data, that really muddies the situation. So we don't want incorrect data floating around. That's part of it. A second part, and this is like another reason, like I think interpersonal skills and stuff are really important, is like the way that I was trying to frame this in the first take I did of this is that I personally do not and would never try to, in a public setting, like belittle someone or make someone look like an idiot. Right? So if someone was incorrect about something, so say someone was presenting something and I was like, oh, I disagree with that, or or I have data that suggests otherwise, what I'm not going to do is just like interject and like kind of like step on them or make them look bad. But as necessary, I would try to highlight that like something's incorrect, right? So I might give them the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, like for that information you brought up, could you talk about how that was collected or what have you, right? So instead of jumping to like, hey, you are wrong and I'm right, because that's kind of a weird situation to put yourself in. And some people will do this though. So instead of doing that, I would much rather sort of inquire. Maybe I can learn something about how that data was collected. Maybe there's something I'm missing, right? So I want to give someone the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, in my head, I'm like, that's information that doesn't jive with what I understand. So like, let's try to understand this better. And then as necessary, we might say, hey, like it actually looks like when you collect data that way, it might be that you're missing this other thing. Like, have you, is that something that came up when you were going through this process? Like, what are your thoughts on that? So again, it's not to like single them out and say, hey, look, you must be a dummy. You didn't get this. And obviously I'm using stronger language to exaggerate a point. But in situations like this, it can be very frustrating because to me at least, and I have experienced this, it almost feels like someone's treating you in a way that you would not you wouldn't do that back to them, right? So it almost feels unfair. So when I recorded this morning before CrossFit, and I'm redoing it now, I was walking through a couple scenarios I've been through in my own personal experience. And I also mentioned that I read through a couple of the comments on the Reddit thread to see, and like it does feel like there's some very opposite perspectives on this in terms of like actions to take. So someone was basically saying like, hey, like basically just go take it offline, like, don't worry about it, go talk about it outside of the meeting. And I think the meta point there was like, you don't have to attack them back. Like, that's not going to help. But their proposal was like, basically forget about it in the context of the meeting and go discuss it offline. The other sort of opposite end of the spectrum and suggestions I was seeing were basically people being like, screw that. Like, if someone's going to make me feel like an idiot, like they're going to be an asshole to me in a meeting, like I'm not going to let them walk on me, right? Like, I'm not going to let someone make me look like a total idiot and get away with it. That's totally unfair. So if they're going to do it to me, like I'm going to put an end to that right now. And like they're using a public setting for it, okay, like they deserve to have it back to them so that it's sort of stopped right there immediately. And I find that when I read through perspectives like this where they feel kind of completely opposite in terms of actions, that the truth for me is somewhere in between. And I don't mean directly in the middle, and certainly it's going to be contextual, but somewhere between those two things. So historically, I would say that when I've been in situations like this, I do make it known that I don't agree with something. And I have been in situations where people will basically like they're if you've heard of the phrase like throwing someone under the bus, like kind of like left them out to look like an idiot. I've had this happen to me in my career multiple times. I've had it from my manager before. I've had it from people that you might call them peers, different roles, but like peers, so to speak. And yeah, like I guess my approach to this is somewhere in the middle, right? So first thing that I recommend to everyone, and it's easier said than done, but I highly recommend you practice it, is keep calm. And advice my wife has given me on this stuff, which sounds funny, I've talked about this before, it legitimately works really well. It's breathe. And you're probably thinking, well, no shit, I'm breathing all the time. Like, that's not really helpful advice. But the whole point is that when we're getting frustrated, I think she could probably explain the physiology behind some of this stuff, but like Basically, you want to get oxygen to the parts of your brain that are responsible for rationalizing things. So literally take a deep breath and drive oxygen to your brain, because when you're getting frustrated with something and you're not thinking rationally, you're likely going to say things that you don't mean or that you regret. Maybe you mean them in the moment, but you're going to regret them. So I have found personally, there's an event that occurred earlier in my career in a meeting. I won't go into all the details, but I was with my team and someone else, and this someone else was trying to make it look like I had really dropped the ball on something, and they were presenting data and to basically management, and what they presented was factually incorrect. So it was really awkward. So they were presenting incorrect information, trying to put it on me. And I, to this day, if I could literally call up my teammates, and this is like 6 years ago or something, maybe longer, I could call them up today and say, do you remember that meeting? And they would say, absolutely, because the person was presenting the information. Everyone, like my team, was just watching them and kind of like, I know in their heads they were thinking like, oh no, like what's about to happen, because they know it's not correct. And as soon as the person finished speaking, I can remember everyone on my team kind of like slowly turning their heads to look at me like, what's about to happen? And honestly, in that moment, I was furious. I was so angry because it was like incorrect information. Someone was clearly just like trying to punt responsibility to me, to blame me for something, and it was incorrect. So it was almost like a total disregard of me. And I was feeling frustrated because I'm like, that's not something I would ever do to someone else. Not to mention it's incorrect. So I remember taking a huge breath. And if I could call up my team members from that time and get them to talk into this camera, they would tell you, I sat there and went, and then I just said, no. And it was really, like, to them, it was the funniest thing they've ever seen, at that time at least. And the point of me telling you this is that I had to calm myself down. Okay, so I think that's a critical thing. You don't want to start speaking when you're upset, regardless of like if you're going to address it in the meeting or take it up offline. Don't let your emotions get the best of you. You will say things you regret, and not to mention, it looks, quite frankly, it's embarrassing to watch adults yell at each other and say mean stuff to each other. You might feel in the moment like, oh, I'll show them. It's the only word I have for it is embarrassing. I've had to interject and stop literally grown men. I've had to stop grown men from yelling at each other on a meeting in front of like junior engineers. And it's honestly one of the most embarrassing things I've had to watch. So I'm trying to say this to you so that you can realize that in the moment, like, oh, I'll show them, but like, you're not showing anyone. Now, I do think it's important to stand your ground. And I'm not going to get into the details of this one, but there was a situation where I had a manager that was basically presenting incorrect information or disregarding decisions that were made and trying to make it look like I had completely failed at something. And I am more than happy to take responsibility on things, but they started presenting some information, and I was fully prepared to be like, that's incorrect, and here's sort of the sequence of events. But the point of me telling you this one, without going into the detail, because it doesn't really matter, is that I didn't make it about the other person. As much as I wanted to be like, hey, like, stop being an asshole to me, like, that's not how you treat other people, because I very much would have loved to turn it into a lecture about how you treat other humans, because that's not what you do, right? I'm not going to go do that back to the person, because it's equally as, like, in my opinion, it's equally as wrong to try and put someone on the spot like that. Just because you do it to me, I don't feel that that's a good reason to do it back. But I will stand my ground on things, and I will not make it about the other person. So that's the key part of this second piece, is You can present information and not try to attack someone. Just because someone did it to you or made you feel that way does not mean you have to stoop to that level. And I truly feel like it's stooping to a level when you have to start belittling other people or attacking someone's character. Data speaks, right? Information speaks, facts speak. You don't need to go after someone to prove a point. So I would highly recommend you don't do that. Now, to some of the other comments that I saw in the thread about like, oh, take it offline and stuff, I think there could be a time for that. Like if you need to get into the details, so say, you know, you present your facts, you're not attacking the person. You're like, so someone said, you know, here's what we measured and you know, here's the result. And someone speaks up and they're like, no, that's incorrect. And you're like, well, I literally measured this stuff. Like I have the data. Like what does it mean for me to be incorrect here? If you're going back and forth, I think it's totally fine to stand your ground about data. And if there's a discrepancy and people cannot agree, number one, we want to de-escalate it from being about attacking people, right? So that's an important part. That's sort of the entire talk that I've been giving so far is don't make it about people, de-escalate it, focus on facts. If you can't get past the facts, people cannot agree on the facts, I think that's important to take up offline. Okay, because if depending on what the meeting context is, if you're going to derail the whole meeting because of this, might not be worth it. If everything can't proceed, or sorry, if nothing can proceed without that decision being made, like maybe it is worth discussing in the meeting. Maybe it does need to be derailed. But I would say, like, if you have to get into the nuances and understand how data was collected, maybe two groups of people disagree on fundamentally how something should have been done, and there's gaps. And you have to come together, get an agreement, and go forward. Totally fine. So I think that's a reasonable approach. But something else that I wanted to layer on top of all this is like, in terms of taking stuff offline, so I want to give you another example. I'm going to park the manager one because I don't think that's not something I want to get into on a recorded video, at least at this point in my career. Perhaps in the future in different contexts, I'll get into more detail on it without revealing the person, wherever it is, because it's not relevant. I just don't want to talk about the detail and because it may be too revealing. In other situations, right, even situations that I've been managing where other people are, say the situation where people were yelling at each other, that is something that I think does warrant a conversation offline. Maybe not to address what's going on. So, you know, if someone is presenting incorrect data, like, let's get that cleared up, focus on the data. However, if you felt like in a conversation, someone was making you feel like an idiot and you didn't appreciate that, that is something that I would have a follow-up conversation on. And in prior videos for Code Commute, I've talked about this kind of thing a lot, and it's way easier said than done. But I am a firm believer that if you're having difficulty working with other individuals, talk to them. Don't put it off. Don't let it continue to build resentment, because it's so easy to just say, oh, I hate that person now, like screw them, whatever, never work with them again. It doesn't help anything. You may feel like, oh, it's hopeless, whatever, they're just a piece of shit, like no one likes working with them anyway. They're just the hard person to work with. Please believe me, or give it a shot at a minimum. This person's driving by and staring at me talking in my car. Go away. Have a conversation with them. Take that part offline. You don't need to have that private conversation in front of the group of people, but you could tell them, right? And you could have a conversation and say, hey, by the way, in that meeting, I just wanted to talk through that, but I felt like when you were presenting that information, that it felt like I was being belittled. It felt like you were kind of calling me out, and it felt almost like you're putting me down and not focus on the data, right? So you could say, I just wanted to talk about this because I didn't appreciate it, and I wanted to see maybe if there's a way that we could talk about how to do that more effectively in the future. You know, is that something we could talk about offline ahead of time? Is this something like, I don't know, like maybe this person didn't realize that they were having that kind of effect. And more often than not, I would say that's the case. I would say more often than not, people don't intend to be a piece of shit to other people. People don't generally want to be mean to others. They don't want to put other people down. It's more often that people receiving things are sort of inventing that. They're going, I see what someone's doing, therefore they must be trying to be mean. And I think a lot of the time people just don't realize that they're doing things in an off-putting way. And bringing some awareness to that, I strongly think, because I've seen it happen many times, can lead to a much better working relationship. So I realize what I'm saying is difficult because it means a hard conversation, but I would strongly recommend doing it. So if I could leave you with that, that's what I would do. So to recap very quickly, 1, I think it's important to stand your ground about factual information. If you're doing that, let's not make it about the other person, right? It's not a personal attack. I guess 0 I should have counted, but it's number 3. 0 is to remain calm. In these situations, remain calm. Deep breath, right? It sounds funny. Take a deep breath before you speak. It will help you. And then the last part was really like taking stuff offline to discuss interpersonal things. That does not have to be in a public setting, even if it started that way. Take it offline, try and, rebuild that working relationship or build it up in the first place. So hope that was helpful. Again, friendly reminder, if you want comments, if you want questions answered, leave a comment. Check out my main channel, Dev Leader, for the live streams on Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific. And if you're interested in knowing what the topic is, if you go to weekly.devleader.ca, that is my weekly newsletter. You do not have to subscribe to the newsletter if you're not a newsletter person. I'm not going to be offended. But the newsletter is generally the topic that will be the live stream. So if you want to see, like right now I'm recording this on a Saturday, my newsletter's out. You have all Saturday, all Sunday, all Monday until the evening to go check out what the topic's going to be, understand what I'm going through, prep any questions you have. And if you have totally different questions not related to the topic, come ask them anyway. Let's hang out. I will see you Monday. Take care.